Thank you for joining us today for this presentation of Data-Informed School Counseling. My name is Crystal Brewer. I am the school counselor at Simpson Central School in Pinola, Mississippi, and I currently serve as an ASCA Shadow Trainer. Joining me today is Joni Shook, who is also an ASCA Certified Trainer. As we begin the presentation today, we do want to quickly go over the copyright notice and help remind you that all intellectual property contained in this presentation today, as well as any materials, are trademarked materials of ASCA and may not be used or reproduced without the written prior permission from ASCA. As we begin today, we also want to take a moment and go over what the objectives for this presentation are. Our goals are that by the end of this session, you will be able to, one, distinguish between participation, ASCA student standards, and achievement data, and two, that you will be able to explain how to gather, disaggregate, and assess a wide variety of data to create effective action plans and result reports to demonstrate growth for students. Now, as we begin the presentation today, we want to take just a minute to acknowledge that data is something that can inspire a little anxiety and trepidation in some of us, including myself. Another thing that can do that is change. And as we are now dealing with the introduction of the 5th edition of the ASCA National Model, we just want to hold space for the fact that you may be feeling a little anxiety or a little unease about the change and how you will utilize data in this newest version of the model. So we hope through the presentation that we will help alleviate some of that anxiety you may be feeling and help you feel more confident in the use of data in your comprehensive school counseling program that aligns with the 5th edition of the ASCA National Model. So as we begin, we also want to just take a moment and reflect on the ASCA National Model Diamond that represents all of the components of our comprehensive school counseling program, including assess, manage, define, and deliver. When we think about the use of data, it is really an integral part of the work we do every day as school counselors. Data serves a number of purposes in our comprehensive school counseling program, but among the important roles that data plays for us is, one, it informs the goals and interventions that we implement as school counselors. Two, it also validates those outcomes. It shows the impact of the work that we do every day with students. And then finally, data is a way that we can communicate the value of our role and the work that we do to our education partners. Honestly, data is such a valuable advocacy tool for us as school counselors, and we really need, for those reasons, to get comfortable and become very proficient with our data. So when we think about the big picture of school counseling has long been about measuring change. That's what we do. We want to show impact and change in the students that we serve. So when we are thinking about that, there are several broad categories that school counseling programs are designed to impact, and specific measurements that go with each of those results that we are focused on. So we focus on access, ensuring that each and every student has access to the programs, the services, and the interventions that are necessary for them to be successful. We measure that through participation data. We also are focused on the result of life readiness. Are our students ready for life? Are they ready for college? Are they ready for careers? Do they have all the skills necessary to be successful both now and in the future? We measure that through our ASCA student standards data. And then finally, as school counselors, we are focused on ensuring that all students are successful academically. And we are going to measure that through our academic achievement data. We want to take just a moment to focus on those three types of data that we just mentioned, but we also want to take the moment to look at how that may look a little different from our fourth edition of the Ask a National model. So in the fourth edition of the Ask a National model, we collected participation data. In the fifth edition, we're going to still be collecting participation data. Now, participation data is measured by answering the question, who participated in what activity and for how long? In the fourth edition, we had mindset and behaviors data. However, in the fifth edition, we are going to transition to referring to this type of data as ASCA student standards data. Now, what we are collecting and how we are collecting it is going to be the same, but we are changing what we refer to that data as. So we are measuring that by attainment of the ASCA student standards. Finally, in the fourth edition, we had outcome data that we collected and we measured. Outcome data included achievement, attendance, and discipline data. However, as we transition to the fifth edition of the Ask a National model, we are going to be focusing specifically on achievement data. Now, achievement data is measured through academic achievement. Things like our traditional grades, our standards-based grades, benchmark assessments, promotion rates, graduation rates, and test scores. Of these three types of data, this transition from the broader outcome data to specifically focusing on achievement data is definitely one of the biggest changes between the fourth and the fifth edition. However, we do want to call attention to the fact that we are in no means saying that attendance and discipline are not still important factors to consider in the interventions that we deliver as school counselors. As a matter of fact, we want to recognize and pay attention closely to a number of contributing factors that impact our student achievement. Those things include both attendance and discipline, as well as systemic barriers, student perspectives, and the perspectives of our education partners. So all of these factors are still a part of the work we do, and we should take those things into consideration as we develop, implement, and measure our interventions for students. So let's take just a minute and focus on each of the three types of data that we mentioned. First up is participation data. Participation data, as we said earlier, is the number of students involved, the number of activities that were delivered, and how much time was spent delivering that intervention. So some examples of participation data may be, we had 48 students in one class for 50 minutes of instruction, or we had 15 seventh grade students who participated in small group that met for 6 sessions for 30 minutes. Next up is our ASCA student standards data. Now, our ASCA student standards are very critical to the work we do as school counselors. This document and these standards, which have not changed, it's still our 6 mindset standards and our 30 behavior standards, are based on research and best practices on non-cognitive factors that help students succeed. This is an important part of the work we do every day. Just like teachers, school counselors have standards that drive the work that we do. And the ASCA student standards is an important part of the data that we collect. So when we talk about ASCA student standards data, these assess the student standards via stated learning objectives. We do that through the use of pre and post assessments, and we're going to go into more detail about that in just a moment. We also use these student standards to provide evidence of school counselor intervention effectiveness, and they help us link the work that we do as school counselors to student results. Finally, we use the data from our ASCA student standards to improve the interventions that we deliver as school counselors. Some examples of ASCA student standards data would be, do students know 2 ways to solve a conflict? Or students can organize their study materials? Or students know the steps to writing a goal? When we look at developing our pre and post assessments, it's important to understand that we start with the ASCA student standards. So for instance, if we were to take Behavior Standard Learning Strategy 3, Time Management, Organization, and Study Skills, we would start with that student standard and then develop a learning objective. What do we want the student to be able to demonstrate or to know as a result of us providing intervention on that specific standard? So if our learning objective was, we want students to create a specific but flexible personal schedule to ensure schoolwork completion, then how we would measure that would be our pre and post test item. So we may develop an item for our pre and post test that states, I know how to create a personal schedule that includes sufficient time for schoolwork. So it's important to understand that the pre and post test items should directly correlate to the learning objective that should come from the ASCA student standard that we are focused on. So when we look at our ASCA student standards data and our pre and post test assessments, there are 2 types of items that we can utilize in creating our pre and post assessments. One type of item would be a Likert scale. That is where we would rate an item on preferably a 4-point scale. Or we can utilize knowledge-based items where students demonstrate knowledge through their responses on either getting items correct or not. When we focus on these, we want to provide just a few tips for when you are developing your pre and post Likert scale assessments. So when you're developing a Likert scale-based pre or post test, best practice would be use a 4-point Likert scale. Avoid unsure or no opinion options. So we don't want to have an ambiguous choice for students to pick. Sometimes if you allow that, they'll just go right down the middle and really not give us any significant data one way or the other. We always want to ensure that our pre and post test assessments are identical. We can't give a pre-assessment and then make adjustments or change the wording or change the number of items. The pre-test and the post-test should always be identical. We are going to administer this pre and post assessment before any of the activities, strategies, or interventions are delivered, and then after the conclusion of that activity, strategy, or intervention. And best practice is we will have no more than 3 to 5 questions or prompts as part of our pre and post assessment. This is just an example of a pre and post assessment using a Likert scale. You can see based on the tips that we just gave, there's 4 points. There's no unsure or ambiguous answer choice. There's only 3 items listed. So this is an example of a pre and post assessment that you might be able to use. So when we use the pre and post assessment, then, and we've given it and we've got the data, then how do we calculate the data? So we want to kind of walk you through that really quickly. So our first step is once we have the results, we're going to count how many students responded with each Likert value. So we see here on the chart an example of a pre and post item that might be given. So the item is setting a personal academic goal is helpful. So we see in each category from strongly disagree, we had 5 students that indicated that answer choice. 3 students indicated disagree, 2 students indicated agree, and 0 students indicated strongly agree. So that represents a total of 10 students who responded to this pre-assessment. Step two is we would then multiply each number of students by that Likert value. So we had 5 students who indicated strongly disagree with a value of 1. So 5 times 1 is 5. 3 students indicated disagree with a Likert value of 2. So 3 times 2 is 6, and so on. So we're just going to multiply the number of students by the value of that Likert item to get a sum. So step 3 is we add those sums together. So 5, 6, 6, and 0 gives us a total of 17. And then the final step, step 4, is we're going to divide this total by the number of students. So we take our total of 17 and we divide it by the total number of students, which was 10, and that gives us a 1.7 average of the student response for this item number 1. So we would repeat this step for each item on the pre-assessment, and then we would do these steps again for the post-assessment once that is given, and hopefully be able to show the change from the pre-assessment values to the post-assessment values. So next up on our knowledge-based items, these are assessments that require students to demonstrate knowledge. So these items may be short answer or open-ended. They're commonly going to begin with how or what. Some examples may be name 2 types of coping skills, or what are 3 ways you can calm yourself when you're upset, or explain how you choose a calming strategy. So this type of item would require students to provide a response, which in turn is also going to require a little bit more work on your part as the school counselor, because you're going to have to take a little bit more time to ensure that the student either got the correct response or did not. So how do we calculate those? Well, this one's pretty simple. What was the percent correct on the pre-test and what was the percent correct on the post-test? So from the earlier slide, one of the examples given was name 2 types of coping skills. So after you go through the answers provided by the students on the pre-test, you're going to see what percentage of kids got that item correct. And that's going to be the data that you communicate, that percentage number correct out of 100. And then you would repeat that process again on the post-assessment for these types of items. All right, so in general, a few additional tips we want to give for pre and post assessments. One, use the fewest possible relevant questions. Some of us can struggle with feeling like we need more items, and that's just not best practice. Use the fewest possible relevant questions to get at that learning objective that's been created. Next, ensure that your questions are always age appropriate. You would not ask a pre-test item of a first grader that you would ask of an 8th grader and vice versa. So make sure that your questions are always age appropriate for the age group that you're working with. Next up, we encourage you to always make sure you're using parallel language for all of your questions. So best practice is to ensure that the desired response is always the highest rated. That's going to be best practice when creating your pre and post assessment. And then finally, when you're developing your pre and post assessments, your items can be a mix of Likert and knowledge-based items, or they can be all one type. We're going to show you some examples later on in the presentation of in the communicating of your data for pre and post assessments, so you'll get a better feel for what that may look like in the actual communication when there's a mixed type of assessment questions. All right, the last type of data is our achievement data. And when we're focusing in on achievement data, that is going to include things like traditional grades, benchmark assessments, promotion and retention data, whether or not students are on track for graduation, test scores, and standards-based grades. So some examples of achievement data would be the 7th graders who are at risk of failing math. Your second grade students not meeting grade level expectations for standards at the end of the first report card period. Your fifth grade boys not meeting proficiency on beginning of the year benchmark. ELL students retained in sixth grade. 10th grade students off track for on-time graduation, or it could be students who are scoring below 3 on AP English. So sometimes whenever we look at all of these different types of data and we think about the comprehensive programs that we have planned or that we implement in our schools, we can feel very overwhelmed thinking, how do I measure all these things all throughout the school year? And so we want to just take a moment to kind of clarify that in order to monitor student change as a result of school counseling services, there are only specific things that ASCA expects you to or encourages you to assess throughout the course of the school year. It would not be feasible or practical or necessarily the best use of your time for you to measure everything that you do in the course of a school year. So just as a point of clarity, ASCA encourages that the following things be measured or assessed each year as part of your comprehensive school counseling program. First, your achievement gap plan. So that's going to measure participation, student standards, and achievement data results based on your achievement gap goal. Next up is you should assess 3 or more classroom lessons. That's going to include your participation data on those lessons as well as your student standard data results. And last, ASCA encourages you to measure one small group that you have delivered throughout the course of your year. So that is going to include participation data on that group as well as student standards and achievement data results. When we're looking at our classroom lessons, the 3 that you're going to assess, they can be standalone lessons or they can be a unit of 3 lessons that you deliver. And you also, when you're looking at your small group, it's important to note that your small groups should meet a minimum of 4 sessions and they should include 3 to 12 students. So as we move forward in the presentation, we're going to be focusing on the achievement gap plan, and we're going to intentionally walk you through each of the components of the achievement gap plan and data results. Because if you have a solid understanding of that, then you're going to be able to translate that knowledge into how you report on your data for both the classroom and the small group as well.
Thank you, Crystal. So where do you start when it comes to data? Districts are very data rich these days, and it can be challenging knowing where to start. The ASCA National Model has excellent tools to help you navigate the process, and I'll be sharing and explaining these tools specifically regarding creating achievement gap plans. Achievement gaps continue to be areas of great focus as schools and school systems work to meet the needs of each and every student. When school counseling programs align their work with the school and district priorities and address specific gaps, it not only helps students, but also creates awareness and support for school counselors to continue this work. The foundation for an achievement gap plan is understanding these priorities and what the data tells us about gaps. So the school counseling program data priorities template is your guide. This process starts with identifying the achievement goals and priorities of the school, then reviewing the data related to these priorities to identify specific data points where there are gaps. Most schools create annual school improvement plans or strategic plans to guide the work of the school, and this is where you want to start. If that's not available, districts typically have plans or initiatives that identify the areas of achievement to be addressed. Let's take a look at how to go from a broad goal or area of focus to identifying specific students. This slide and the next two demonstrate the process of drilling into the data to find gaps. These are intended to demonstrate moving from a broad area of focus, which we often see in school improvement plans, to the specific students where gaps are evident. This particular example starts with a school-wide focus on students in grades 3 through 5 who are below proficiency on the beginning of the year benchmark assessment in ELA. Within that group, it's helpful to look at how many students are at each grade level. And in this case, over half of the 80 students are in the third grade, which indicates an overrepresentation at that grade level. And then drilling down even further into those 45 students, we can look at specific groups of students and see that more than half of the 45 students are male. Other subsets that could be considered as the drill down occurs could be prior retentions, students with disabilities, English language learners, ethnicity. So it's important to understand the various subsets within subgroups, and most data at schools is disaggregated around those subsets. This is a middle school example of school priorities and the data. Once again, we start with a very large group, which is the school priority, 120 students. And then once again, drilling down, start to see by grade level in this case, and then further on by subject area, where the students are that are struggling the most. And finally, our high school example. So it's highly likely that someone in your building is already running reports that disaggregate the data to help you in this work. Is there a staff person who is responsible for this who could help you? You want to collaborate with the data folks in your building or at the district level as you review this data. So let's review the template process and you will see how it aligns with this drilling down process. On the template, the first column is space to record all the school or district goals or priorities that are related to achievement data. As you can see, this school has two priorities. They're fairly broad. One is about increasing achievement in math and science, the other about increasing learning gains and for the lowest quartile in reading and math. The next column is where the counselor records the specific data point or points related to an achievement gap, found in the review of the data. So for the first priority, the counselor identified 7th grade as having the highest number of students with failing grades in the first quarter in science and in math. And for the second priority, once again, it is 7th grade students with the highest numbers in the lowest quartile. So from these data points, the counselor has stated what will be addressed in the school counseling program and where they will create a goal for these students. And in this case, it is the 7th grade students with F and math in the first quarter. This data review can also inform the school counseling program about areas of focus for other services, such as classroom lessons and small groups. It's significant in this case that 7th grade students are struggling. So in addition to the achievement gap plan, counselors would use this data, collaborate with 7th grade teachers, and identify the Ask a Student standards this grade level needs to develop to improve achievement. So as Crystal mentioned, the 5.0 model is focused on achievement data as the measure of impact. And if you've worked with the 4.0 model, this is a change you may be processing. This information found in research on this slide demonstrates the significance of focusing on achievement data and the role of contributing factors in the ultimate goal of students graduating from high school. This information can also be helpful if your school or district does not identify achievement priorities or if you're unable to locate this information. So we are going to use the process of the Achievement Gap Plan to see how data continues to inform your work. Once again, the template is designed to guide you through the steps of creating a goal and a plan to work with the students in the goal. So let's take a look at some examples of the process on the next few slides. We start with a data priority that was identified on the school counseling data priorities template. So you see the statement about 14 current 7th grade students. We then from that begin to create our goal statement by completing steps 1 through 4, which helps you to describe the specific students and then what you want to change and the measure of change. We end with an achievement goal statement that combines all the information in steps 1 through 4 to make a clear and succinct goal statement. Here are a few other examples of goal statements that meet the expectations of the template. The next step in the process is to understand the contribution of other factors that may impact the achievement data. The template gives you step-by-step guide for gathering and analyzing this data. This example demonstrates what the counselor found in the attendance and discipline data for the 14 students, as well as what students and partners shared regarding why they believe these students are struggling. This data gives the counselor the facts needed to begin to create the plan for this goal. Significant areas identified are the attendance data for the 14 students, plus the themes in the perspectives around students' feelings of helplessness and barriers interfering with learning. So the counselor now selects a behavior standard or more from the Ask a Student standards. This is based on the goal and the contributing factors data collected, and that assures that the counselor's focus is specific to the identified needs of the students in the goal. From there, learning objectives are then stated that align with the selected standards, and pre-post items are created to measure the attainment of those learning objectives. So the new ASCA step-by-step guide has resources and examples for this process. Now the counselor has the information needed to list the strategies that will be used to address the gap. These are indicated as direct services provided to the students in the goal, as well as indirect services with others on behalf of these students. Finally, the counselor needs to be sure to administer the pre-assessment before beginning the strategies. And that completes the Achievement Gap Plan. To create a data-informed school counseling program, that means that we also have to have a plan for collecting, analyzing, and sharing our results. So here are the screenshots of the report section of the Achievement Gap Plan. Another set of templates that you will be using to collect data is on the classroom lesson plan. You'll see that the results section of this look very similar on the right side of the screen to what's in the Achievement Gap Plan. And also the same for small groups. So any small group that you'll be collecting data on, the plan, and then the results look very similar, once again, to the Achievement Gap Plan process. So now here's an example of a completed Achievement Gap Plan data report. And you will see at the top on the left side is the first place that we report data, which is our participation data. In this example, there were 14 students that we began with. One student withdrew, so we ended with 13 students that were in the Achievement Gap Plan. So that completes our Achievement excuse me, that completes our participation data results for this particular plan. The next section is life readiness graphs, which is where we report the results of our Ask a Student standards, pre and post assessments. So you'll see that there's a place to record the standards that were selected, as well as to graph the pre and post results side by side. There are two graphs in this case because there were two types of questions responses needed. Two of them were Likert scale and two of them were knowledge-based. So the first graph on the left is the Likert scale pre-post average student response. The graph on the right is the percent correct on the knowledge-based items. And then the last part is where we report our achievement data results. So once again, you'll see the graph demonstrating that for this group of students, where they started, the baseline of 13 Fs, and then where they ended at the end of the fourth quarter. And because the counselor also indicated that they wanted to track attendance data and address that concern for this group of students, they also are reporting out the attendance data, the baseline on the left, and then the final on the right, the cumulative number of absences for this group of students. So graphing results for your data reports, this gives you powerful visuals to share with others and communicate the results of your work. Think about administrators, staff, parents, advisory councils. Those are your audiences and maybe others for the graphs. You can do infographics, you can do it, provide it in a one-page handout, you can provide it in a newsletter, thinking about how to convey the impact of what you did with your students as a way to advocate for the services of the school counseling program. At the end of this template, there is a place for an optional data organizer. So this is a place to gather all of your data prior to starting to do your graphing. I think this is really valuable and something to consider using, even though it does say optional. I think that it will be very helpful to help you gather your information prior to creating graphs. You will also notice that as a part of this, there is a place to calculate the percent change from baseline to final data for the achievement data. So if you don't know what that calculation looks like, here's the formula for those of you who like math. And if you're not crazy about it, I have a place to show you that will help you get there easily. But if you want to do the math, you use this formula. So the example on the right shows what the percent change would be for 35 cumulative failing grades at the beginning of your goal and 16 at the end. It would be a 54.2% change. There's also percent change calculators available. If you just Google that, there are so many there. There's an example in the link, but there are many others where all you have to do is put in your baseline and your final data, and it will calculate for you. So we hope that this overview of the role of data in school counseling programs has helped you in your pursuit of a comprehensive school counseling program. Remember, to have a data-informed program, you need to start with a review of the data that includes drilling down to identify gaps. Be sure to ask for help from administrators. When you do that, you're speaking their language. Remember also that the templates are the tools to use to guide you through the process. They have implementation notes, directions, and examples. So be sure to take advantage of those resources as you do this work. Here are some resources that we want to share with you to help you as you become a data-informed school counseling program. And I want to just say thank you for joining us.